I'm Claire Whitman, and this is a story that, if you're honest, you might find more familiar than you'd like to admit. On my graduation day, while other students hugged their parents beneath showers of confetti and applause, I sat alone. No flowers. No one calling my name from the stands. Halfway through the ceremony, my phone buzzed a notification from my mother's Instagram. Surprised Lily with her dream trip to Paris. So proud of our girl. End of 12. Pinned below, it was a comment. She's the only one who makes us proud. I stared at the words for a long moment, then smiled faintly, opened my banking app, and pressed withdraw. Not out of revenge, but to reclaim the part of myself I'd been investing in that family bond for years. Before I tell you the rest of this story, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like you were only loved when you were useful? If so, share your story and where you're watching from in the comments below, so I'll know I'm not alone. Thank you for being here. My childhood revolved around a beige two-story house in the suburbs of Fort Collins, a place where everything seemed to orbit around one person's light: my younger sister, Lily. In the framed photos lining our hallway, Lily's face was always in the center, glowing in a white ballet dress, holding a rose. I was the shadow beside her, smiling politely in a gray sweater. My parents, Mark and Elaine Whitman, had a phrase they repeated like it was family scripture. Lily was born to shine. And somehow, I learned to believe it, the way you believe in sunrise inevitable, unquestioned. Lily was 4 years younger, charming, talkative, effortlessly talented at everything my parents considered special. She took piano lessons at 7, ballet classes soon after, and switched to watercolor painting simply because her teacher said Lily had a rare sensitivity to light. Whenever guests came over, my mother would call out, "Lily, play Claire de Lune for everyone, they love hearing you." On. And the whole room would fall silent as the melody filled the air. While I stood in the kitchen, washing dishes, letting the sound of running water drown out that complicated ache in my chest. Pride, envy, and something nameless in between. They called me steady, reliable, mature for my age. Compliments reserved for those who never get applause. I still remember one spring afternoon in 8th grade when I got my first A+ in advanced math. The paper was stamped with a bright red circle, and I ran home glowing with rare excitement. But just as I said, "Mom, guess what I got?" She looked up from the dinner table with a hurried smile. "That's great, honey. Now help Lily rehearse her recitals next week." I froze for a second, then folded the paper, slipped it into my pocket, and tied Lily's ballet shoes before she stepped onto the stage. That was the first time I realized the spotlight only shines one way. And no one ever asks if you even want to stand in it. Those years, I lived on someone else's schedule. Every morning, I woke up early to make breakfast for the family, packed Lily's lunchbox, then jogged to school. In the afternoons, I did my homework at the kitchen table while Mom drove Lily to piano lessons. And in the evenings, when my parents came home, they always brought stories about the beautiful melody or the angelic voice their younger daughter had performed that day. When my name came up, it was usually something like, "Claire's such a good girl, she keeps the house quiet so Lily can focus." I wasn't angry. I wasn't even jealous. I just got used to being the background while Lily was the painting. Whenever neighbors asked, "How's your older daughter doing?" my parents would answer with proud smiles, "Oh, she's very well behaved, never gives us any trouble." They said it as if being well behaved was the highest achievement I could aspire to. Over time, I learned that in our house, sacrifice wasn't praised, it was expected. Like clearing the dinner table without being asked, or smiling as Lily received flowers on stage. I learned to stay quiet when others spoke about her. To tuck my sadness away into diary pages no one would ever read. At 14, I didn't know what fairness meant. I only knew that love in our home had weight. And it always tilted toward the one who shone brighter. By the time I entered high school, favoritism wasn't an exception anymore, it was a ritual, disguised behind polite smiles and carefully chosen compliments. When I turned 16, Lily was accepted into a prestigious art academy in downtown Fort Collins. The family celebrated as if she'd been accepted into Harvard. My parents bought her a new electric piano, hired a private music tutor who came every afternoon, and started referring to the living room as Lily's studio. How does twile? Mom even bragged to the neighbors, doubtless froze that 7 lovers the Tom. Lily's got such natural talent, she just needs the right kind of investment. I sat on the staircase, listening to that sentence, and wondered quietly if anyone had ever thought about investing the right way in the other daughter. That same year, I asked for permission to enroll in the AP Computer Science class at school. I didn't have glamorous ambitions. I was just curious about how lines of code could create something that worked, something I could build and control entirely on my own. When I told my dad, he raised an eyebrow. Why would a girl study engineering? You'll give up halfway anyway. I forced a smile and said all I needed was an old laptop to practice on. Mom replied, "There's still the desktop in the basement, it runs fine, just use that." Ah, that Dell was so old the fan screamed like it was gasping for air every time I turned it on. Meanwhile, Lily got a brand new MacBook Pro for her video editing projects in art class, Dad said proudly. I still remember those nights in the basement, the pale blue light of the screen reflecting on my face while Lily's piano floated down from upstairs. Clear, flawless, like a reminder that my place in this family would never change. One cold winter morning, my school hosted the regional science fair. I had spent weeks building a small project called Energy Efficiency Tracker, a program that measured electricity usage in real time. I taught myself to code, printed the poster on the school's old printer, and when the results came in, I won second place for the entire state. I called home, my voice trembling with excitement. But Mom just sighed softly. "Oh honey, that's the same night as Lily's winter recital. We can't miss it, you understand, right?" I stood in the empty hallway, looking at the silver metal glinting under the fluorescent light, and for the first time, I understood. Some victories only matter when someone is there to see them. On the night of Lily's performance, I still went. I sat in the back row, holding a bouquet I'd bought with money from my library job. When the spotlight hit her, she bowed gracefully, and the audience erupted in applause. Mom leaned toward me and whispered, "See that? Your sister was born for the stage." I smiled, nodded, and tucked my cracked, dry hands into my coat pocket. After the recital, they took family photos. I was the one holding the camera. In the center of the picture, Lily beamed, flowers in hand, and I was just the person who pressed the button. High school drifted by like that. Every holiday, every award ceremony, every certificate I earned. All quietly overshadowed by Lily's recitals or art showcases. I learned not to expect anyone to show up. Not to wait for a message that said, "We're proud of you." And not to feel disappointed when no one asked, "How hard did you work for this?" In our house, effort wasn't something people noticed. They only noticed who was in the picture. Once, my teacher sent out a flyer highlighting Outstanding Students of the Year. Oh. Lily's face was there smiling, holding a paintbrush. Beneath the caption, "Fort Collins School of the Arts, our local pride." I stood in front of the bulletin board for a long time, staring at that photo. I didn't feel jealous, just empty. Because I knew that even if my face were ever printed on something like that, my parents would still say, "That's great, honey. Now help your sister hang her exhibit posters." At night, when everyone else was asleep, I sat in front of that old Dell, typing lines of code, fixing errors one by one. Just to prove that I, too, could create something beautiful. Not for photos. Not for applause. But simply to believe that my effort meant something, even if no one saw it. And maybe, in that basement, I learned my first real lesson about the world outside. That silence isn't always the absence of love. Sometimes, it's the preference of those who only know how to love when someone's watching. I left home at 18. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. If I didn't want to spend the rest of my life as a shadow beneath that basement ceiling. I enrolled at Front Range Community College, just over an hour's drive from Fort Collins. The only school I could afford on my own. No one helped me fill out FAFSA. No. Congratulations, you're growing up dinner. Just me, that wheezing old laptop, and a stack of printed forms I read over and over late into the night. I worked mornings at a Starbucks near campus, starting my shift at 4:30 a.m., long before the sun came up. My hands always smelled like coffee. My hair was dusted with milk powder. But every time a customer tipped me a few dollars, I thought, at least this time, the money was mine. One evening, I called home to tell Mom I had finished registering for my first semester. She sighed and said, "That's great, sweetheart, but you understand we just can't afford to help right now. Your dad still has to support Lily, and art school is expensive." I murmured that it was fine, that I understood. But the next morning, when I opened Instagram, I saw Lily standing beside a brand new silver Honda Civic. The caption read, "New car for my art internship in Santa Fe, thank you Mom and Dad." I stared at the photo for a long time, then turned off my phone and went back to my night shift. I didn't cry. I just felt something cold settle inside me, like someone was squeezing the empty space in my chest. I began to teach myself not to ask why. When Dad hurt his back and had to take time off work, I sent home $500, the money I'd saved for my next semester. Mom called me, her voice full of emotion. "Claire, you're so responsible. If only Lily were half as dependable as you, we wouldn't have to worry so much." I smiled into the phone, though my fingers turned white from gripping it too tightly. That was the first time I realized how heavy a compliment could feel. It didn't warm me, it anchored me, like an invisible contract whose first clause read, "Don't expect anything in return." I worked endlessly. Mornings at Starbucks. Afternoons in class. Evenings cleaning classrooms for extra pay. When classmates talked about catching a movie or going out, I'd smile and say, "I've got another shift tonight." My grades were excellent, always near the top of the class. But every time I sent my report card home, the only response I got was, "Good job, keep it up." Oh, by the way, Lily was chosen as the lead performer for the fall recital. I stopped waiting for praise. I just told myself that if I worked hard enough, if I was strong enough, maybe someday, they'd finally see me. But what I didn't realize was that, in their eyes, my being stable had become the very reason they stopped worrying about me at all. There were nights when I sat in my tiny rented apartment, studying while counting the last few coins in my wallet. The yellow light spilling in from the hallway reminded me of the old kitchen back home. The one where I used to stand making milk for Lily, baking cookies to help Mom. I once thought being the responsible older sister was just who I was meant to be. But at 19, I began to realize that some roles aren't forced on you. You're simply taught to believe you belong in them. Lily kept posting photos from Santa Fe, her paintings, her exhibits, dinners with new friends. I liked a few at first, then stopped. When I came home for Christmas break, I saw her Civic parked in the driveway, shining under the porch light. I had borrowed a friend's car to get there. Mom said casually, "You don't really need a car, honey, you just go to work and school nearby." Her tone was light, but the words cut cold. They always had a way of making every unfairness sound reasonable. And worse, I'd grown used to hearing it. That night, while washing dishes, I overheard Mom on the phone with a neighbor, saying, "Claire's the most responsible child ever. She takes care of herself without being told." I set the plate down in the sink and watched the water swirl away. That's when it hit me. In my family, being responsible wasn't a compliment. It was permission to be forgotten. After the holidays, I returned to school, and for the first time, looking at my overcrowded work schedule, I felt afraid. Not afraid of exhaustion, but afraid that if I ever stopped, even for a single day, someone would call me selfish. I didn't know if I was studying to escape, or just preparing to become the pillar everyone else leaned on. But one thing was certain. From the moment I sent that $500 home, independence stopped being a choice. It became a duty, one I didn't know if I'd ever be allowed to rest from. When I was 22, things finally seemed to be looking up. I had just finished my transfer program and landed a job in the revenue department of a medical clinic in Denver, my first real position with a contract, health insurance, and the first flicker of what adulthood was supposed to feel like. I rented a small apartment in Aurora, took the RTD light rail to work every morning, coffee cup in hand, carrying that quiet pride that after years of scraping by, I could finally stand on my own. But that pride didn't get a chance to settle. One evening, Mom called. Her voice trembled. "Your dad's herniated disc came back. The doctor says he has to take at least 3 months off, and the hospital bills, I don't know how we're going to manage." I looked down at my very first paycheck, still crisp in my hands, and said softly, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll help." That night, I sat at my kitchen table, notebook open, calculating every expense down to the cent. After a few sleepless nights of thinking it through, I called her again, trying to sound cheerful as if I'd come up with the perfect solution. "What if we open a separate account," I said, "called the Family Medical Fund? I'll put in $350 a month. Whenever Dad needs medication or hospital payments, you can use it. It'll make me feel better knowing there's something set aside." There was silence for a few seconds on the other end, then I heard Mom crying. "Oh, Claire, you always think of others. Thank you, sweetheart. Not every child understands like you do." I smiled, a strange warmth rising in my chest. For the first time, I felt like my care had been seen, acknowledged, even if only through a few short words. The next morning, I went to the bank and opened a secondary account, naming it the Whitman Family Fund. No paperwork, no contracts, just faith that family shouldn't need boundaries. I printed the first transaction receipt, folded it neatly, and slipped it into my wallet like a tiny badge of devotion. That night, I texted Mom a photo of the confirmation. She replied right away. "Got it. You really are the backbone of this family. Thank you, my smart, wonderful daughter." I smiled at the message, not realizing that those kind words had just tightened a new kind of rope around me. Soft, invisible, but unyieldingly strong. The first month went by, and Mom texted to say she'd used $220 from the fund to buy Dad's medication, with the rest saved for physical therapy. I didn't ask for details. In the second month, she said, we had to pay off part of the old hospital bill. By the third, her message read, "Lily needed some video equipment for her art class. Thankfully, your fund helped cover it." I stared at that text for a few seconds before replying, "That's okay, Mom. As long as it helps everyone, I'm happy." And I meant it. I truly believed kindness shouldn't have limits. That if I kept giving enough, eventually, love would find its way back to me. Each morning, I went to work and kept pushing forward. I learned how to process medical claims, how to navigate insurance terminology, and began to understand what a revenue cycle really meant. How money flowed through a hospital system. Ironically, I could trace every dollar in the clinic's accounting software, yet had no idea where the money in my own family fund was really going. One late afternoon, near the end of the month, I visited home. Dad was resting, looking better, and Lily was busy setting up for another video shoot. As I walked into the living room, I saw a brand new Canon camera sitting on the table. Mom noticed my glance and said quickly, "It wasn't expensive. Lily needed it for her final project. I used this month's fund, but I'll replace it later." I nodded and smiled. "That's okay, Mom, as long as everyone's taken care of." She reached for my hand, her eyes misty. "You're always so understanding, Claire. Not like someone else who only knows how to spend." I didn't answer, just squeezed her hand lightly. Inside me, pride and uncertainty tangled together, like a golden thread gently wrapping around a wound I hadn't yet realized was there. In the months that followed, transferring money became second nature. Every payday, I automatically sent $350 to the family fund before even thinking about my own bills. Sometimes, when my personal account was running low, I'd laugh it off and tell myself, "It's fine, the family fund comes first." I never wrote anything down, never checked the statements. In my mind, It was simply a good deed, and good deeds didn't need receipts. What I didn't realize was that I was nurturing a kind of conditional love. One that came with an unspoken rule. To be considered the good daughter, I had to keep giving. On my birthday that year, Mom texted me, "Happy birthday, sweetheart. Stay healthy and don't overwork yourself. You're our pride." I sat alone in my apartment, rereading the message over and over. Not because I was touched, but because it hit me that they only ever said they were proud of me when I was giving something. Never once, in any birthday message, had I seen the words, "We love you for who you are." But I didn't dare think too deeply about that. Instead, I turned off my phone, opened my laptop, and signed up for another online class on healthcare finance. I convinced myself that if I became better, smarter, more successful, they'd love me more. During those early working years, I lived simply. Dinner was instant noodles most nights. My apartment was bare. No vacations, no shopping sprees. And yet, I felt at peace, believing that every sacrifice was an investment in something greater. Love, belonging, pride from my parents. What I didn't know was that, like any investment left unchecked, it only needed enough time to turn into dependency. Not theirs on me, but mine on the feeling of being needed. And when you start confusing being loved with being needed, you don't realize you're slowly disappearing. By 26, things at the clinic were finally steady. I'd gotten a raise, started managing revenue reconciliations, and for the first time felt like a real adult. But just as my own life began to find balance, something about the family fund started to feel off. One evening, while reviewing my bank accounts to prepare for tax season, I opened the statement for the secondary account. And there it was, a number that made my stomach drop. In 4 years, almost every single deposit had come from one person. Me. No contributions from Mom. None from Dad. Just the same recurring name. Month after month. C. Whitman. I sat frozen in front of the screen, the cursor blinking like an anxious heartbeat. I didn't want to believe it. Maybe Mom had used another account, I told myself. Maybe she just forgot to label the transfers. So I texted her, keeping my tone light, as if I were just curious. "Hey, Mom, has the fund been used for Dad's medical expenses lately? I noticed there haven't been any notes about medication these past few months." She didn't reply right away. When the message finally came, it read, "You wouldn't understand. Lily needed plane tickets for her art exhibition. This is a big opportunity for her. We had to help." I read that text again and again, each word cutting like a tiny blade. No explanation. No gratitude. Just a tone that made everything I'd done sound expected. I didn't respond. I just turned off my phone and sat there, staring at my reflection in the dark screen. The next day, I printed the entire account history month by month, year by year. Nearly $17,000 had been deposited since the day I opened the fund. I couldn't tell how much of it went toward hospital bills, how much toward trips, or how many art supplies and projects it had quietly paid for. I placed the stack of papers in a brown envelope and wrote one word on the front, proof. From that day on, every time I transferred money, I kept the receipts, saved every email confirmation, as if I needed to remind myself that even kindness should have evidence. I began to notice the little things. Whenever I brought up finances, Mom changed the subject. "Oh, Claire, you're always calculating things. Why don't you be more like Lily and just enjoy life?" Dad would chuckle and say, "You're a woman, why worry so much about money?" Every time I heard that, my throat tightened. I didn't dare argue, because deep down I was afraid. Afraid that if I ever stopped giving, they'd call me selfish. Afraid that their love, like the money I'd sent them, would simply stop flowing the moment I did. I kept contributing, but the warmth I once felt was gone. Each time I hovered over the confirm button, my finger lingered a little longer. Each time I saw Lily's new posts, Los Angeles, Chicago, now New York, I couldn't help wondering if her flights had been paid for by the family fund. But then I'd scold myself, whispering, "It's fine, at least she's happy." S2. One evening, while I was working late from home, Mom called me on video. Her voice was bright, bubbling with excitement. "Guess what? Lily just got selected as an assistant for an international art exhibition. We're so proud of her." I forced a smile. "That's great, Mom. I'm happy for her." When the screen went dark, I sat there in silence, staring around my small apartment. White walls, an old desk, a stack of unpaid bills. That's when it hit me. While I was counting every dollar to save, the family's pride was being built on the quiet money I kept sending away. I started feeling tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. Some mornings, when my phone pinged with auto transfer $350, I felt a tightening in my chest, as if something inside me was being drained drop by drop and no one noticed. I thought about stopping, but then I'd picture Mom's teary smile, saying, "You're such a thoughtful daughter." End of fic. And I froze, terrified that if I stopped, they'd lose faith in me. Or worse, that I'd lose the only reason they still called. Because without the money, what else did they need me for? One night, after my shift, I opened my laptop and started journaling. Something I hadn't done since high school. The words poured out like they'd been trapped for years. I wrote about the fear of being seen as selfish, about trying to measure my worth through bank transfers, about the widening gap between me and the people I once called family. By the end, I stopped typing for a long moment, then slowly wrote the final line. "I work hard to buy love, but it's never enough." I saved the file as April. docx. Then closed the laptop. That night, for the first time in years, I didn't set an alarm for the next morning. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of the light rail fading away. And in that quiet, I finally faced a truth I'd been running from. Sometimes, what truly drains you isn't giving too much. It's pretending that you're giving out of love, when deep down, you're just trying to keep your place in someone else's heart. The day I graduated college, Denver's air was cool and sharp, sunlight spilling softly across the long rows of folding chairs set up in the courtyard of the University of Colorado, Denver. I wore a black gown, the square cap slightly crooked on my head, and in my hand was the invitation I had mailed to my parents 2 months earlier. In that envelope, I had written only one simple line. "It would mean the world to me to see you there." They never replied. But I still held on to a fragile hope that maybe, when I walked across that stage, 2 familiar faces would rise from the crowd, waving, calling my name. The ceremony began. Students sat in neat rows, the flags of each department fluttering in the breeze. I was in the 10th row, beside a classmate whose parents had just wrapped her in a proud embrace before the event started. She turned to me and asked, "Where are your parents sitting? I'll wave to them for you." I smiled. "They're busy with work." It was a small answer, but inside, it echoed like wind whistling through an empty space. When the dean began his speech, I glanced toward the section of seats I'd marked with a thin ribbon days before. A quiet act of faith, a symbol of waiting. The seats were empty. Beside them, a little boy giggled in his mother's lap. I took a slow breath, swallowing the lump in my throat. Maybe they're just running late, I told myself. But deep down, I knew. My parents were never late. They just weren't coming. Halfway through the ceremony, while the announcer called the names of students receiving honors, my phone buzzed in my gown pocket. I almost ignored it, but the light from the screen caught my eye. A notification from Instagram. A new post from Mom. The first line hit me like a punch. "Surprised Lily with her dream trip to Paris. So proud of our girl." Below it was a photo of Lily at the airport. Wearing a beige trench coat, grinning wide between my parents, all 3 of them holding plane tickets, faces glowing with joy, as if they were celebrating the greatest milestone of their lives. And, pinned at the top of the comments, was my mother's own words. "She's the only one who makes us proud." I don't know how long I sat there after that. The sound of the loudspeakers around me faded into a blur until all I could hear was the steady, cold rhythm of my own heartbeat. I kept rereading the words each letter, each period, striking the softest, most fragile part of me. The only one. I pressed my lips together and smiled faintly. A smile without joy, only clarity. In that moment, every memory came flooding back. The afternoon I brought home that first A+, the nights I worked myself to exhaustion to send money, the conditional compliments, and the voice that once said, "You're such a thoughtful daughter." And I finally understood. All the pride I'd spent years trying to earn had never been mine to begin with. When my name was called, I walked across the stage, shook the dean's hand, and accepted my diploma. It didn't feel heavy or light, just hollow. From the stands came waves of applause. For others, from others. I smiled, bowed, and stepped down. No one called my name. No camera flashed. Only the wind brushed past the ribbon tied to the empty seat I'd saved, fluttering softly like a quiet farewell. After the ceremony, when everyone gathered for photos, laughter, and hugs, I sat alone on the stone steps by the campus pond, removed my cap, and looked into the still water. The pale gray sky reflected back at me. And for the first time, I realized how small I really was. I unlocked my phone and scrolled back to Mom's post once more. In the comments, relatives and her friends had written, "Paris, Lily's so lucky. Elaine, your daughter is incredible." No one mentioned me. No one knew that on that very same day, their other daughter had also graduated with honors. I opened my banking app. The number in the family fund glowed on the screen, $18,900. I stared at it for a long time. Every late-night shift, every early morning, every instant noodle dinner instead of a proper meal, all of it lived inside those digits. And now, I knew what I had to do. I tapped withdraw. The system prompted a confirmation window. I hesitated for a few seconds, then pressed the final button. A small chime sounded, transaction completed. It was quiet, almost a whisper. But to me, it echoed like the sound of a door closing. Firm, final, and peaceful. I didn't cry. I just sat there, watching the ripples fade across the surface of the water, carried away by the wind. Inside my mind, a calm voice, one I'd never truly heard before, rose quietly. "I'm not seeking revenge. I'm just withdrawing my share, the part of myself I've poured into that family bond." On the way home, I stopped at a small roadside cafe and ordered a hot latte. The young barista smiled and said, "Congratulations on graduating." For the first time that day, I smiled back and meant it. As I sat by the window, watching people pass beneath the soft glow of Denver's streetlights, a strange lightness washed over me. It felt like I had finally learned the lesson my entire youth had failed to teach me. Sometimes, love isn't about endlessly giving. It's about knowing when to stop. That night, after I'd showered, my hair still damp, my phone buzzed repeatedly on the table. The screen lit up with a familiar name, Dad calling. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the screen for a moment before sliding my finger across to answer. His voice came through, sharp and controlled. "Claire, what's going on? Your mother just checked the account. Did you withdraw all the money?" I said nothing, just listened to his heavy breathing on the other end. He continued, voice low but seething. "That was family money. You had no right to take it without telling us. That's betrayal." I leaned back against the wall, wiped a drop of water from my neck, and spoke quietly. "I only took back my share, Dad. The part I've been putting in for the last 4 years." His tone hardened. "You don't understand. We're a family. Everything is shared." A faint, tired laugh escaped me. "Then tell me, Dad, was the trip to Paris part of that shared family fund? Or was it under the medical expenses you said the fund was for?" Silence. Then another voice broke in Mom's. Her tone trembled, not from emotion, but from wounded pride. "You don't understand, Claire. Lily deserved it. She makes this family proud. And you. You're always so cold, so calculating. Family isn't something you measure in money. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I thought I would cry or argue or fall back into old habits and say, "I'm sorry," like every other time. But I didn't. This time, my voice came out low, steady, and firm. You're right. Mom, family can't be measured in money. But you also can't use one person's money to buy pride for another. I used to think I was worthy too, you know? Maybe the difference is, I never learned how to be loved. I only learned how to be needed. Silence. I could hear Dad exhale, a long, defeated sound before his voice cracked through the phone. You've changed, Claire. Family is everything. If you walk away from this, you'll regret it. I turned toward the window. Denver shimmered outside, its lights stretching across the skyline like a living heartbeat. Cars moved steadily below. And no one knew that, on the 7th floor of an ordinary apartment building, a woman was quietly cutting the cord she'd spent her entire life mistaking for sacred duty. I spoke softly, not in anger, but in closure. Family is everything? Maybe. But not when everything means I have to be empty. From now on, if you want to talk about money or funds, please don't call me. I'm tired. Claire, Mom's voice rose sharply, desperate. But I didn't let her finish. I pressed end call. A single beep echoed, then silence. I set the phone on the table and realized my hands were trembling. Yet my chest felt lighter than it ever had. For once, there was no heaviness after a confrontation. No reflex to smooth things over with an apology. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to say sorry for protecting myself. I stood, walked out to the balcony, and let the night wind brush through my damp hair. Below, voices drifted up from the street, laughter, distant music from a bar down the block, mingling with the faint scent of lavender from someone's garden on the floor below. I inhaled deeply. Maybe this is what freedom feels like. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet peace that comes when you finally stop trying to prove your worth to people who were never looking. The phone stayed on the table, screen lighting up again and again with unread messages. You're hurting the whole family. Lily's devastated, how could you? We're just trying to hold this family together. I stared at them for a moment, then swiped them away, no replies, no explanations. I wasn't angry anymore. Just sad. Sad for the version of myself that had spent so many years chasing love in a place that only knew how to measure worth by usefulness. That night, I brewed a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the traffic fade into the distance. My hands were still trembling, but from the cold, not fear. I knew that the moment I ended that call, I had crossed a quiet threshold in my life. I was no longer the dependable daughter who holds everyone up. I was simply a person learning how to live for herself. I whispered softly, as if speaking to the 14-year-old girl who once sat under the staircase, listening to her sister play piano. It's okay now, Claire. You don't need them to be proud of you anymore. I took the family photo frame down from the wall and placed it gently into a box. No anger, just the absence of expectation. Outside, Denver's lights flickered to life, the wind carrying a soft chill across the Platte River. I took one last sip of coffee and made myself a promise. From this day forward, I'd start sending money to a different account. One named Future of Me. And I smiled. Not the kind of smile meant to prove strength, but the kind that comes when you finally touch something real. The kind of peace no one gives you, but that you quietly reclaim from within yourself. After that night, my apartment felt unusually quiet. No more urgent messages. No more anxiety each time my banking app pinged. Life went on: work, coffee in the mornings, the small rhythm of survival. But inside, there was a strange emptiness. A mix of relief and rootlessness. For years, my purpose had been one thing: to be recognized. And when that tether was finally cut, I realized I no longer knew where to aim my energy. It was during that uncertain stretch of time that I met Dr. Sandra Morales, head of revenue management. The first person in years who saw something in me that even I had long forgotten. One evening, I stayed late at the office, finishing up a revenue reconciliation report. The floor was nearly dark except for the glow from my monitor. Then I heard a calm voice behind me. "Claire," Dr. Sandra Morales said, leaning against the door frame, arms folded. "How long do you plan to stay here? You're the last light on this floor." I gave a weak laugh. "Just trying to make sure everything's perfect before I leave." She walked over, pulled up a chair beside me, and spoke slowly. "I used to be like you, thinking that if I worked hard enough, long enough, someone would notice. But eventually, I realized no one owes you pride. You only owe yourself a chance." I didn't say anything. Her words weren't advice, they were a mirror. And in their reflection, I saw my own tired face illuminated by the computer's glow. After that night, something in me shifted. I decided to enroll in the AHIMA Revenue Cycle Management Certificate Program. Evening classes at the Community College of Denver. Not because I needed the credits, but because I wanted a path that belonged only to me. One unconnected to the family fund or anyone's expectations. The tuition wasn't cheap. But for the first time, spending money on myself didn't feel like a crime. When I told Dr. Sandra, she smiled. "Good," she said. "Stop waiting for someone to give you permission to move forward." Around that time, I also started visiting Aunt Maggie, my mom's sister, who lived in Boulder. The only relative who never asked, "How much are you helping the family these days?" She lived in a small, lavender-filled house, its walls covered with landscape paintings she'd made herself. One afternoon, I told her about withdrawing the money. She didn't look surprised. She simply nodded and said, "Walking away isn't betrayal, it's rescue. You can't keep swimming if someone's holding your leg." I sat in silence, feeling those words land right where the wound still lived. Aunt Maggie poured me a cup of tea and smiled gently. "All you need now," she said, "is to learn not to feel guilty for choosing peace." So I started changing, slowly. I canceled my car lease and began commuting on the RTD light rail every day. I stopped rushing through dinners to work extra hours. Instead, I read books on personal finance, learned how to build an emergency fund, how to budget, how to separate needs from obligations. I opened a new savings account and named it simply Safety. Every month, I transferred 15% of my paycheck into it. And each time I saw that balance rise, I felt like I was rebuilding the foundation of my life, brick by brick. A small, steady architecture of freedom. Life became simpler, but for the first time, it felt real. I started cooking my own meals, practicing yoga every morning, learning how to enjoy the quiet that once felt like loneliness. I bought a small pot of lavender for my balcony, a reminder of Aunt Maggie's words. Peace is something you have to plant yourself. On weekends, I'd spend hours at a secondhand bookstore near Union Station, reading until the sun shifted across the floorboards, never feeling like it was a waste of time. Every time I spent money on myself, even something as small as a new notebook or an afternoon cappuccino, I felt a strange mix of guilt and wonder, like I was relearning what it meant to be allowed to feel joy. One chilly October night, after my evening class at CCD, I stood waiting for the light rail. The wind whipped through downtown Denver, catching the small note I'd been holding and sending it fluttering onto the platform. I bent down to pick it up. On the paper, written in my own handwriting from the week before, were the words, "Don't chase approval, build peace." I smiled to myself. Maybe this was the most important course I'd ever taken. The one that finally taught me how to stop asking for permission to be happy. Then, one Monday morning, as I walked into the office, a coworker glanced up from her phone and said casually, "Hey, Claire, I think your mom's a little upset on Facebook?" I frowned and opened the app, not expecting much. The first post on my feed stopped me cold. "Some kids grow up and forget who paid the bills." Dozens of comments followed. Old family, friends, and relatives chiming in with sympathy and judgment. "Kids these days only think about themselves." Elaine, you're such a strong woman. Don't let an ungrateful child bring you down." And then one that made my stomach twist. From a relative I hadn't spoken to in years. I know, Claire. That girl was always cold, never fit in with the rest of the family. I stared at the bright screen, and the first thing I felt wasn't anger. It was emptiness. For years, I had worked myself to exhaustion, sent money every single month without fail, and told myself that staying silent would keep the peace. And yet, in just a few sentences, all of that sacrifice had been rewritten into one word. Ungrateful. I set the phone down and took a deep breath. I'd promised myself I wouldn't react out of impulse again. But this time, silence didn't feel like strength. It felt like complicity. That evening, I sat in my apartment and spread out every printed bank statement across the table. Each transfer was there, plain and undeniable. $350 a month, every month, for 4 years. I took photos of the pages, no edits, no embellishments. Then opened Facebook, a place I rarely posted. My fingers hovered for a long time before typing a short, calm message. No accusations, no bitterness, just truth. I didn't take money. I only took back what I once believed would bring me closer to them. But maybe learning to love myself is the only way to stop losing everyone else. I attached a few of the statements. No tags. No names. And I hit post. I didn't expect it to spread so quickly. Old friends, coworkers, even distant relatives began to share it. In the comments, someone wrote, "Finally, someone brave enough to tell the truth." Another person messaged me privately. "I remember you from Starbucks years ago. Now I understand why you were always so quiet." 2 days later, a notification popped up. Mom's post had been deleted. No apology. No message. Just silence. But that was enough. I didn't post again. Didn't defend myself. Didn't argue. Because some battles aren't meant to be won. Only ended at the right time. That night, while I was cleaning up, my phone rang. The name on the screen made me freeze. Lily. I hesitated for a few seconds before answering. Her voice was hoarse from crying. "Claire, I didn't know that money was yours. I thought Mom used it for Dad's treatment. I didn't mean to." I stayed silent. On the other end, I could hear her shaky breaths between sobs. "Finally," I said slowly. "If you really want to make things right, start by saying no to anything that isn't yours. Don't accept another gift bought with unclear money, no matter how much Mom says you deserve it." She broke down, whispering, "I'm scared they'll think I'm betraying them." That sentence made me close my eyes. Because I remembered being her once, terrified of being called ungrateful, terrified of losing love by daring to stand up for myself. I spoke softly, but firmly. "Betrayal isn't speaking the truth, Lily. Betrayal is staying silent when you already know what's wrong." On the other end, there was nothing but quiet breathing and muffled crying. I didn't say anything more. The call didn't end with an apology or promises of reconciliation. But something cracked open that night. Not between the two of us, but inside the wall of silence that had stood between truth and comfort for years. Afterward, I stepped out onto the balcony and looked down at the street below. The city buzzed with life, cars, laughter, movement. No one knew that high above, someone had just set down a few heavy memories. I wasn't happy, exactly. But I was at peace. The kind of peace that comes when you finally stop waiting for someone else to understand you. The next morning, when I opened Facebook, I saw that Lily had shared my post. No caption. No comment. Just a small heart emoji. But that was enough. It meant she understood. Maybe we all have to learn our own lesson eventually. That real love doesn't come from gifts bought with someone else's silence, but from finding the courage to speak the truth, even when your hands shake as you do it. I closed my laptop, brewed a cup of tea, and for the first time in years, I played piano music. Claire de Lune, the same piece Lily used to practice over and over when I was 14. But this time, the sound wasn't a wound reopening. It was a gentle closing of a long, quiet chapter. Outside, dawn broke over Denver, and I knew. The storm had passed. In the aftermath of the social media whirlwind, life slowly settled into a new rhythm. I was promoted to Revenue Integrity Analyst at the Health One system, a position I once wouldn't have even dared to imagine. The work demanded precision and responsibility, but I loved it because it was mine. No one took credit for my efforts. No one compared me to anyone else. Every time my name appeared in a company recognition email, it felt like I was signing a new contract with my own life. From now on, my worth would no longer be measured by others' approval, but by the calm I felt inside. I moved to a small apartment in Littleton, a quiet suburb about 30 minutes from downtown Denver. It wasn't big, just one bedroom and a small balcony overlooking the distant Rocky Mountains. But I loved every corner of it. I planted lavender along the railing. The flower Aunt Maggie once said, can teach even old wounds to smile. Each morning, I woke early, brewed coffee, opened the windows to let the sunlight flood in, and took Pixel, the little rescue dog I'd adopted, for a walk around the neighborhood. Pixel loved running through the flower beds, sometimes glancing back to make sure I was still there. Maybe he understood the fear of being left behind. The same fear I'd once lived with for so long. Life was simple, but peaceful. I learned how to spend money on myself without guilt. Buying a new book, trying a yoga class, or saving for a solo trip to Santa Fe, the same city where Lily once did her art internship. I visited her old art studio, stood in front of the gallery where her work had been displayed, and realized I no longer felt pain. Only a soft kind of tenderness. Like looking at an old photograph of a life you once loved, but no longer belonged to. One early autumn evening, I was drying my hair when my phone buzzed. A message from Lily appeared on the screen. I've moved out, I'm living on my own now, I wanted you to know that. I froze, staring at the words. No apology. No explanation. Just a small, simple statement. But to me, it felt like a wound finally being stitched closed. I typed back, "That's wonderful, Lily. I know you'll be okay." Neither of us said anything more after that. But somehow, I knew she had begun her own journey. The same way I once did. A week later, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. When I answered, a deep, weathered voice spoke on the other end. "Claire, it's Dad." I froze again, this time for different reasons. After a brief pause, I said softly, "I'm here, Dad." He took a long, heavy breath, as though gathering courage. "I'm sorry for the silence all this time. I know you don't need money or thanks, but you need to hear this. You were the one who held this family together. If it weren't for you, your mother and I wouldn't have made it through those years. I regret so much. But your mother still doesn't see it." I sat down, watching the warm light spill through the window, listening as his words fell into the quiet between us. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel victorious. Only a deep, aching calm. I replied gently, "I don't need Mom to admit anything, Dad. I just need peace. And I have that now." There was a long silence on his end. Then his voice came, soft, trembling. "I'm proud of you, Claire. Proud in the way I should have been all along." I smiled, tears falling before I could stop them. "I know, Dad. Thank you for finally saying it." After the call, I sat quietly for a long time, listening to Pixel's small, rhythmic snores at my feet. For the first time, I realized my heart held no anger. No, why didn't they love me like they loved her? No sleepless nights replaying old arguments about fairness. Just a clear, open silence. The kind that lets you look back without pain. Sometimes, I still see my old post being shared again online, accompanied by comments from strangers. This story made me think about my own mother. Whenever I read those words, I smile. Not out of pride, but because I know that by telling my story, I've handed a small piece of courage to someone still trapped in the cycle of conditional love. One afternoon, while watering the flowers, Pixel darted after a drifting yellow leaf, leaping so clumsily that I couldn't help but laugh. A breeze rolled down from the mountains, carrying with it the faint, clean scent of lavender. I inhaled deeply and closed my eyes. For the first time, I felt completely weightless. Maybe this quiet, ordinary joy was what I'd been searching for all along. Not recognition. Not an apology. But the simple freedom of no longer needing to prove anything to anyone. And in that moment, I finally understood. Healing isn't about forgetting the past. It's when you can look back at it, smile, and say, "Thank you. Because of you, I found myself." 3 years have passed since the day I withdrew from the family fund. Now, at 31, I'm the Revenue Integrity Manager at Health One System. A role I earned not through sacrifice or silence, but through long nights of study, hard work, and the quiet belief that I was worthy all along. I live in a small apartment in Littleton with Pixel. Still the same tiny dog, but now old enough to sense when I'm sad, and when I'm simply at peace. Every morning, we walk the trail that winds around the lake.